I'm just testing this out, seeing how things are working. We'll just wait here to see who shows up. Okay, good. You can hear me. Okay. You know that I am horrible with technology, so hopefully this all works out. Okay, so I see we've got a few people that I don't know here, and we've got an assortment of SCA and Amtgard already, because some of this will help for both of those groups. Just give a few minutes here. So, what kingdoms or organizations are you guys from? Just to get a start here. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get this started. There was a link to some notes that was posted in the event. It's kind of a rough outline of what I'm going over. I sometimes kind of get off track and don't write things out very well, so it's sort of in an order and sort of not. I tried the best I could. For those that don't know, for Amtgard, I am Dame Callandra Dracowolf of Barony of Ravenscross in the Kingdom of Golden Plains. SCA, I am Lady Serena Callandra. I'm part of Adler's Rue in Kingdom of Anstoria. Uh, this is actually the first in the series that Kelly Alona, Dame Alona from Neverwinter, and I are putting together for every month for the next year. We are going, one or the other of us, or maybe both, are going to do some sort of ANS related or class leading up to our 20th year in Amtgard in April of 2021. And so I'm starting this off with feast planning because that is something that I love to do. Unfortunately, because of health, I can't do a whole lot of that anymore, but I'm always willing to help people with it and do parts of it. I just can't do feastocrat anymore. But I'm sharing some of my knowledge with feastocrating and the logistics involved. A lot of people, when they start trying to plan a feast, they want to start with a menu. That is several steps away from where I start. My first question always is, where is it going to be? Because that affects what I choose for the menu. Because some things, if you have to transport to the site, they don't reheat very well, or they don't keep warm very long, like mashed potatoes and rice. Those are really hard to keep warm if you have to travel an hour to get to your site because you're not able to cook on site. And that happens sometimes. So, with the location, my first question always is there a kitchen on site? And you have to go into more detail than that too, because you need to know what kind of oven or stove is there, how many burners are there, is it a commercial size or is it a tiny little thing? One of the sites here in Amarillo, the lake house, has this incredibly tiny little oven that is not big enough to hold a full size cookie sheet. And it doesn't even have racks in the oven, at least the last time we tried to use it. So it just has a couple small burners that are usable. And so these are important questions to know when you're trying to figure out what you're cooking. And sometimes the autocrat may not know the answer. And so if they don't, ask them if you're able to contact the site yourself, because some sites do have rules that they want to keep everything to one contact person. If not, make sure you can get the autocrat to answer these questions. A lot of times, some of them I've dealt with, they just go, yeah, there's a stove, but they have no idea what it is. And so some other things to know is whether it's gas or electric, because some pans you can't use on a gas stove very easily. Also, I've worked at some sites, especially some summer camps, where you have to actually light the stove yourself with a long match. So you need to make sure you have all that there. But that goes into other logistic things to think about. Some other questions with that, with even with a kitchen, would be what kind of cooking appliances are you allowed to bring to use, such as roaster ovens, crock pots, electric griddles, or electric skillets. Some places do have rules against using something open like a griddle or a skillet or a burner, but you can use a roaster oven or a crock pot. So you need to make sure you know that in advance. Also, if you're familiar with the site at all, being able to have an idea of how the circuits run and how many different appliances you can use. I will admit that I have blown the circuit breaker at a site because we had 4 roaster ovens plugged in. Luckily, there were 3 ovens on site. But see, my autocrat just said, oh, there's a tiny kitchen, and I think there's an oven, but I'm not sure. And this is before I knew to ask more questions. So we planned to cook everything in roaster ovens. Well, it worked out that there was enough ovens on site to be able to use. And that's one of those things of always have a contingency plan. Like, even if there is a stove or oven in sight, I usually bring a roaster oven and a crock pot anyways, just in case. Because sometimes your timing of things, of what you're trying to put together, you may not be able to use the burners for everything or the oven, and you need to have an extra cooking space. And if you're not really familiar with a roaster oven, you just think of it as something to put a turkey in. Oh, it is so much more, and it is an appliance that can save everything when you're cooking a feast at times. Because you can use it for liquids, you can use it for meat, but you can also put a pan with a cake in it, and you can bake a cake in it. So it's just an additional little portable oven that you have. And I, at one point, had 4 of them. Let's see. Okay, and also being aware of what type of prep space you have. Do you have a full kitchen, or is it just a partial prep kitchen, or is there nothing at all that you can use? Sometimes there's sites where you're going to have to transport everything in completely, and you may not even have a sink that's in the room that you're using. And so that can make a difference on what you have to do and where you have to do it. And that all goes into considering what type of food you're going to have. Now, if looking at the outline, if your site is outside, then you've got some other questions that you have to look at before you start considering what you're going to cook. So with outside, you would need to consider, what are you cooking on? Are you cooking on a fire? Are you cooking on a propane stove that you have to bring in? Or are there grills on site? And then you figure out, are they charcoal or gas? And with charcoal, you have to make sure, is that going to come out of your feast budget? And think of all those logistic things. And as a side note, if anybody actually would like to know more information about specifically cooking a feast over a fire, please let me know, and I can give you a lot of notes on that. Because just to give you a little bit of background here, I actually have a bachelor's degree in Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Administration, and worked at summer camps for years. And my early experience with cooking for large groups started at summer camps and cooking meals over fire for 45 people. So if you want information about that, just let me know. That's a whole nother world on things. But you would also need to consider whether indoor or outdoor, is there any refrigeration available? Sometimes there's some outdoor sites that do have that available. Indoor sites, you need to make sure, do you have a fridge? Do you have a freezer? What is available to you? Because they may have a fridge on site, but you may not be able to use it, because some churches, they keep their fridges so full of stuff for their own things that you don't have any access to it. And with outdoor sites, you also want to make sure, do you have electricity? And not just, oh yeah, I see there are plugs. Some park districts, they regulate the use of the electricity. So if you don't actually pay for the rental of that shelter, you don't get access to it. Or they only have the electricity turned on for certain months of the year. Such as my first park that I played at in Galesburg, Illinois. Did not have electricity after, I believe, November or something, until spring. So these are things to consider. And that also goes into, if you have to cook off-site, how long does it take you to get to your site? And you have to think about also not just the drive time, but how long is it going to take you to package up everything, get it in your vehicle, then get to the site and unload it. And if it may take you 15 minutes to get there, but it may take 45 minutes altogether when you factor that all in, and you need to think about how are you going to keep something warm. And as I said, mashed potatoes and rice, they're not going to keep hot that long. So, just some things to think about with that. And then, so after that, when you consider all those things about your site and what you're going to have access to, then we get to our budget, because budget is going to affect what you choose to make. Because there's a big difference between, say, if you have $100 to feed 50 people and you have $200 to feed 50 people, on what you can do. And how many people are expected is a big thing to look into that. Sometimes you may not know. Sometimes you're going to get an estimate. And sometimes you get that estimate and a few days before find, oh my gosh, I have to feed 30 more people than I expected. And this is where contingencies are always good. Sometimes, though, you do have to say no. I know with some organizations, they do pre-sell the number or have a certain number set, and once they meet that number, that's it. That's the way it goes. Amtgard usually is not. It's usually assumed if you show up and you pay, you're getting fed. And so sometimes you may have that extra 30 people at the last moment. And that's why I always plan for more than what I'm planning to serve. So if I'm expecting 50 people, I plan to serve about 75, but I also don't say that as 75 servings. I actually up that to about 100, because what counts as a serving for some people, they eat about 3 times more than that, like my husband. Okay. And then some other things to factor in that would be what has to come out of your budget. Does any servingware or paper goods have to come out of your budget? Charcoal, like I mentioned before, or propane. Is that coming out of the feast budget, or is that coming out of something else? And so once you have a good idea of how much you have available and how many people you're planning to feed and where the feast is going to be and what you have access to, that's when you get to really start narrowing down your menu. And that can be the fun part, researching of what you want to do. There are certain things, though, that you do need to look at also before with that, is looking at dietary concerns. Sometimes, if you're doing this for a local park, usually you have a good idea of what kind of allergies and concerns people have, but it's always a good idea to ask if anybody has anything they want to consider. With that, something that's pretty common that you're going to encounter is going to be vegetarians and vegans. I usually put a feeler out to see how many vegetarians there are, and also specifically asking about vegans, because that can make a difference on how you accommodate things. Also with food allergies, some common ones to consider with a lot of feasts right now that you most likely are going to have somebody that has one of these issues is accommodating for not eating spicy foods, gluten. That's a pretty common one, and a lot of people avoiding carbs right now. Now you can't accommodate everybody. Usually, there's going to be something that may be difficult that you can't really work around. That does happen, such as somebody I know that cannot have soy, corn, gluten, and many other things. It makes it difficult. Usually, can find something, and that's another thing with coming up with that menu and accommodating for people, is realizing that you may not be able to accommodate them for every aspect of the feast, but you want to make sure that the people that are attending are going to be able to get at least a whole meal out of what they're doing. So it's important to consider what types of foods that you put together in your menu. I like to do a variety. I kind of have a formula that I use that depends on the size of the feast that I'm preparing. I like to have at least 2 proteins sources, or a main dish, and that could be a vegetarian and a meat, or because I always make sure there is a vegetarian option no matter what. Even living here in Texas, I still plan that. Sometimes the vegetarian option is the salad or the soup, but sometimes it can work into the main dish. And if you're doing a larger feast, having 2 or 3 different proteins is good, because there are also people that don't eat red meat but will eat chicken. So if you're doing say, fajitas or a taco bar, having a chicken option, a beef option, and a vegetarian bean option. There you go. And then I like to do a super salad or both with every feast that I do, because a super salad can be a main dish depending on what options you have available with it, especially a soup. But with salad, if you have enough decent toppings or things to go with it, because usually one of the two of those you're going to be able to accommodate a lot of different food allergies and dietary concerns. And then, so I also like to have a bread with each one. Now, that's where things can get tricky with accommodating for gluten free. Some areas you may not have a lot of people. In my area, I do have a lot of people that have to accommodate with that. So I know sometimes they bring their own gluten free bread, but if you have an option you can bring, such as like doing gluten free crackers, would be something that would work with that. And then I'd like to do at least one vegetable side dish, but if I do soup and salad and two meats, then there may just be one vegetable. But if you're doing a larger group, you want to have at least two different side dishes. Vegetables are a really good choice, but also throwing in rice or potato or something like that with it. What you want to try to avoid is making your feast all about one item, such as chili. Even if you have different versions of chili, it limits to, if your entire feast is one thing and just adding toppings to it, that makes it likely that there's going to be people that are going to go hungry, because that, for example, they share a common ingredient of peppers. That is actually a common issue that a lot of people cannot eat. So just think about those things when you're trying to put together your menu and looking at that. And also when you're looking at your dietary concerns and you're looking at recipes, and think, well, what can I alter to make work a little bit better? Like one I've had to work around is black pepper or cloves and cinnamon. Those are common food allergies. And so you want to think about that, of having an alternative. Most recent feast that I did was a pasta bar. And that one, to accommodate for both the gluten-free people and the people that don't eat carbs right now, we did zucchini noodles. That was a compromise to be able to accommodate multiple different food allergies into one thing, and then having different types of sauces to be, and toppings that were served separately so people can add what they wanted. That's another thing, is trying to be able to separate things as much as you can. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but it helps in this day and age with trying to make sure that that you don't have some bad issue come up with allergies. Now, something else to consider with your menu would be, how are you going to set up your feast? How are you going to serve? Are you going to do everything as a buffet? Or are you going to have things served individual plates to a table? With some smaller groups, that works. Or is it going to be dishes served to a table to be served family style? I did do that it was supposed to be for 50 people. That's the one where about 30 extra people showed up. I got that notice a couple days in advance and had to figure out how to accommodate that. And that was also a multiple remove feast, because that's the other thing. Are you serving everything at once? Or for a lot of Amtgardians that aren't familiar with that term, a remove would be a different course. That's a common thing that you see with SCA feasts that you don't see with Amtgard. Occasionally it does happen. I did that for Amtgard. And so you want to figure out how you're going to do that. Something that kind of the closest thing you see with removes with Amtgard sometimes is some people will put a dish out on the tables as people are starting to come in, that will have like some cheese and crackers, fruit. That's a good place to start. It's just a little bit of something at the table for people to munch on and share. With that, and then moving on to the main course. So you may have that at the table, and then may do your main course as a buffet, and then dessert could be served, or it could be a buffet also at the same time. So think about that. And then when you're looking at the menu, if you are able to plan things far enough in advance, then you can bargain shop. And sometimes what goes on sale can help you decide what you want to put on the menu, but also being able to plan things about 2 months in advance helps to watch sales. I know that I have a supermarket chain around here called United that frequently has buy one get one free meat sales, and that makes things so much cheaper than some other stores. That makes it where beef may actually be a possibility when a lot of people use chicken and pork because it's cheaper. But if you watch your sales right and you have somebody with a freezer, then there you go. Same with cheese. Cheese can be frozen, so you can buy that in advance when you have some good sales and put that together. Uh, don't rule out your expensive grocery chains because oftentimes they do have the better sales. I know when I was in the Midwest in Illinois, Meyer is where I got the meat from. They would frequently have 10-pound bags of frozen boneless, skinless chicken tenders on sale for $13, buy one, get one free. So 20 pounds of chicken for $13. That went a long way on feeding people. So it's advantage of planning in advance there. So you get your menu set up and you've thought about how you're going to serve things. Well, another thing with the serving is also taking into consideration what kind of help do you have? And that also is something you should think about when you're planning your menu too, is are you doing this all by yourself or is there going to be somebody there that will be able to help you with every step? I oftentimes end up having to do everything myself at home and then I'm transporting to the site and then go from there. And if you're not sure, ask somebody. Sometimes people that you never think would want to help with a feast actually really would like to help with a feast. Sometimes you can also delegate where somebody can do part of the feast and you do part of the feast. I frequently make the dessert for feast. And I have trouble getting to events itself, but dessert is something that I can usually send with somebody else and I can make it ahead of time, freeze it, and then be able to get it out to somebody. So just make sure you're asking and seeing what you have and who's available to help you with that. Now, if you do decide to do a feast where you break it up on who's making what, make sure they're dependable and make sure there is a clear authority on there that you're the one that's in charge. And if they go and buy something that's not part of what was agreed on, that they're not going to get reimbursed. I did run into that problem with a feast where we were trying to divvy up who was going to do what because it was kind of a last minute, it was going to be the next week. We decided who was going to do what, and somebody said, oh, well, I don't know if we talked about this. And then so they went and bought a whole bunch of cheese when the person that was supposed to buy cheese, they bought cheese too, and we really couldn't afford to reimburse everything, and I had to reimburse it out of my pocket because of that. So now that we are in the day of all this internet and technology, you shouldn't have the issue with communication. That was back before everybody had cell phones and internet wasn't a common thing. Okay, so when you get into that, start getting into that, you've got your menu set and you've got your how you're going to serve and you have your crew lined up, then you also have to start thinking about what are you going to cook and what and on what appliances. I like to make a plan about that incorporates what specific course is going into what cooking item, what I'm cooking it on, and write that out. Sometimes if you have a large group that you're cooking with, it's helpful to have that plan, put it up on the fridge if you can, so that everybody knows what item has to be started at what time, what pot it's going into, and what it's being cooked in. That will help greatly. Now, sometimes you end up having to improvise because something may be taking longer than others. And so that's where you have to think about those contingencies and the backup plans of if this doesn't work in the oven, what else can I cook it in? Can I throw it into a crock pot? This last one, we didn't have quite enough burner space to be able to reheat all the pasta because I cooked the pasta in advance and you just have to bring it up to boiling and cook it for an extra 2 minutes. Well, I had an Instapot that has the option for being able to boil things, so we ended up having to use that to be able to bring some of the water up to boil. Just have to get creative. We also had to use the roaster oven to reheat some of the pasta. Okay, and you also need to consider in advance of your, as I said before, your prep space, but also the time that you have to prep things and what you have to use for those and what you're using to transport things. You can't always count on your site having what you need. Uh, Sometimes some sites, while they may let you use the kitchen, you are not allowed to use the utensils or cooking ware that they have. I have seen some churches that have had those stipulations, so you need to be aware of that. I usually bring everything that I think I could possibly need, just in case. Even if I know the site has it, I bring my own stuff. I have my own feast box that's set up with my own cooking utensils and everything that I use pretty much just for feast. And I also have it in the color of turquoise so that it's easily to identify my stuff from the site that we're at. My stuff is turquoise and purple for the most part. Uh, Now, I realize some of you, you may not do a feast very often, so you may not do that, but you may have somebody in your park that does have extra supplies around to help. So ask around. If you're in the Amarillo, Lubbock area and I can help, let me know. I have plenty of things for cooking feast and about everything that you would need. Same with serving dishes as well. Okay, so that covers a lot of the basic things with that feast planning and the logistics. And I hope I covered some of the questions that I know a lot of people don't always think about. Uh, so is there anybody that have any questions or something you'd like to go over, or any specific feast menus or anything? Okay, I'm just seeing some comments here. Oh yes, a burn ban. If a burn ban's in effect, that is definitely something that you want to ask and make sure of. In West Texas, we don't really get the option to cook over fire generally. Sometimes even a propane stove or a grill could be a problem. Most of the fire feasts I've done were in Illinois, so that's a big difference on there. Okay, Audrey, what is your question? Okay, so small feasts that can be done at a park for 30 to 50 people. Okay, so that is actually what I've done a lot of. So Amtgard or SCA, because that does make a little bit difference on the menu planning there. So with Amtgard, something that's pretty popular is doing things like some type of bar, like a taco bar or a potato bar. I really like a baked potato bar as an option with a feast because I do that with soup. Do soup and baked potato, and so you can easily make a soup that is a vegetarian option, like a broccoli cheese, and that would also be good on top of your potato. And you can have a variety of toppings. And I know my grocery stores around here frequently have 10-pound bags of potatoes, buy one, get one free. So for $4, you get 20 pounds of potatoes. So that's a pretty good start. Uh, Pasta is another simple thing that can be done on a decent budget and is easily to accommodate a lot of different dietary concerns with that. And can be one of my cheapest feasts is actually would be pasta, salad, bread, green beans. And Walmart is a good source for bread. Those dollar loaves of bread are decent. You get about 30 slices out of those, and it's about a dollar or $1.25 now, I guess, in some places. Or with that, let's see, but also pulled pork is another good one that will go a long ways. Uh, Oftentimes you can get pork on sale for get about a 7-8 pound roast for about $12 sometimes, and that you would factor in about a quarter pound per person, a little bit more, about a third if you're looking at some well, we'll say large barbarians like my husband would eat a little bit more on there. And what I like to do if I'm doing something like a pulled meat, like pork or chicken, is to leave the sauce separate. I will cook it in a very basic marinade and allow people to put their sauce on separately because of allergies and dietary concerns on that. Uh, and in the notes, there is a link to a website that will be very useful with planning out your menus and portion sizes. It's for ellenskitchen.com. It is all about cooking for large groups, and there are recipes for cooking for 24 to 100. And even has cooking plans out on there. It has links to portion sizes of how much to allot for different common foods that you need for per person, and has a lot of really useful things on there and recipes. Okay, so question: was the biggest difference between Amtgard and SCA feast, and what can we learn from each other? So Amtgard feasts are rarely period. Um, there's a lot of stigma with a lot of amped guardians that period food means it's not good, that it doesn't taste good. And which is totally not true. And by the way, if you're an amped guardian and wanting to try a period feast, I highly recommend looking at Greek food. The two Greek feasts that I've done have gone over well. One of them was an amped guard feast, and I know there's somebody that was on here a moment ago that doesn't usually like period food and actually loved the Greek feast, especially the Greek cheesecake, which is a good place to start. Another common thing with Amtgard is most feasts are done as a buffet. Rarely do you see it actually taken to the tables, and it's often done as one course. You don't usually have multiple removes, other than there may be cheese and grapes on the table to begin with. And I would like to see more Amtgardians try to do things a little bit different on some of the smaller parks. Uh, I know that I have done that. You also, a lot of Amtgard, you don't see too much of having their own feast gear or decorating the tables. The Kingdom of the Golden Plains has actually been moving towards doing that in the past couple years. We have had a table decorating contests and encouraging people to get their own feastware to add to the atmosphere. That does tend to be lacking at times. Um, Also, the budget. What I've seen for SCA, um, see, we're with Eleanor's talking about with $2 to $5 per person. That's a lot more than a lot of amped guardians are given for our budget. It is common, I've seen, that you're expected to feed 100 people on $100 or less. My kingdom, oftentimes the feastocrat has to pay for everything out of pocket. Now, I can do 100 people on $100 through years of planning, but that's where you really need to plan your menu in advance and watch the sales and freeze whatever you can. Uh, Pork roast and ham tend to be something that can go a long way. Same with chicken. And if you do shredded meat, that helps it going a long way uh, with that. Okay. So, so Eleanor was asking about sideboard feast with roughly $2 to $5 per person. So this was just saying, for me, that's actually a lot of money per person on things that you could easily end up putting together some charcuterie trays with different meats and cheeses, dried fruit, and nuts, vegetables. Now, nuts, you do want to watch what you have for allergies, but doing vegetables and hummus, that's pretty easy to put together in that cost. For a main dish with that, offering some shredded meat, or if it's a smaller group, you could do some sort of meat pies. Uh, shepherd's pie is not quite period, but I've done that in large roaster oven as a pretty simple, cheap one to do for feeding 30 to 50 people. Uh, Sideboard lunches, though, I do like to do something that is kind of easy food, because a lot of times if you've have fighting going on. People are hot and they don't want to eat something heavy. So cold foods are good for that. And putting together a pasta salad or a salad, and as I said, the meat and cheese and charcuterie, and having a variety of fruit and vegetables available. And you can watch those sales and be able to take care of that. Okay, what essentials must have for for a feast prep box? Okay, and I just have to say that's questions coming from one of my squires, so I'm glad you're asking that question. So essential: more than one cutting board. You do not want to chop your meat and your vegetables on the same cutting board. Also, if you know that you're having people that have celiac and need to be gluten free, you need to make sure that you have separate utensils of separate cutting board specifically. I actually, if you don't have one that's been dedicated towards not being used with gluten, buy one for that purpose. And it is for gluten free only. Because there are some people that are so sensitive that if it's ever touched gluten, you can't use that. So having multiple cutting boards, several different types of knives, paring knives and things that are good and sharp for chopping, multiple sets of measuring cups, multiple sets of measuring spoons, liquid measuring cup, several hot pads and towels, paper towels. Always have extra Ziploc bags and plastic containers because you that way you can also send some food home, but also for as you're chopping up things like onions and carrots, that you can put them in something and stick them in the fridge so you're not doing everything at the last minute. That's another thing with logistics is prep as much as you can ahead of time. If there's anything you can cook ahead and freeze, do it. It will save you a lot of pain for that feast day. But also with that feast prep box, I would make sure to include some sort of cleaning wipes, several different sponges. Once again, with the sponge and with dealing with, say, gluten free specifically, you don't want to wash your dishes that you just use for slicing. You just wash slice bread and you wash something. You don't want to use that sponge to wash the pan you're about to cook your gluten free option in. That would not go over very well on there. I know when I did the pasta feast, we also did a separate colander. That was specific for that. I have a metal colander that I use specifically that's going to be for making sure that gluten doesn't touch it because it's not porous like the plastic, and so stuff's not going to sink into it. And so that's a good thing to have. You also want to have several different mixing bowls, a couple spatulas, a can opener, a bottle opener, and let's see, and then several different utensils, different types of spoons, slotted spoons, and everything that you need for serving and spatulas. So generally, if you take one of those big multi-utensil kits that they sell, get a couple of those and stick them in a box. Those are pretty handy with that. How big is my feast prep box? I actually have a couple of them because now that anytime I do a feast now, the new rule is I have to be able to carry everything myself to the car because my husband can't help with that anymore. So I have two boxes. Let's see, this works. That blue one up there is the size of what two of my boxes are, but sometimes the gray ones that are in the background, I use one of those too. Let me see if I can pull out. Okay. Okay, I think I messed things up. Is this still working? Okay, I think I'm frozen.